The small town of Ravenbrook was a peaceful place, nestled between lush green hills and surrounded by dense forest. During the day, residents enjoyed the town's quaint charm, but when night fell, Ravenbrook took on a mysterious, unexplored atmosphere. Alex, a passionate young cyclist, has lived in Ravenbrook all his life. He loved the feeling of the wind on his face and the freedom his bike provided. His daytime walks around the city were his way of escaping the world and finding tranquility. However, a part of Alex always wondered what the darkness of night hid on the empty roads. One night, the full moon illuminated the starry sky, casting a silvery light over Ravenbrook. The city was plunged into nighttime stillness, and the streets were empty. It was the kind of night most residents would choose to spend at home, but for Alex, it was an opportunity. He decided it was the perfect time to go for an evening stroll. With his silver bicycle, he glided smoothly through the deserted streets. His bike's headlight cast a beam of light in front of him, breaking the darkness that surrounded him. Tall trees stood beside the road, and the forest surrounding the city seemed full of hidden secrets. Alex felt electrified as he pedaled along the silent roads. The night breeze caressed your face, and the sound of bicycle tires on the road echoed in the air. He felt alive, and the feeling of adventure coursed through his veins. As he continued his stroll, Alex realized that the night world was a different place. The shadows lengthened, and the sounds of nocturnal nature, such as the croaking of frogs and the distant calls of owls, echoed through the forest. It was a mysterious symphony that enveloped him. His bike's headlight illuminated the dark road, and Alex was focused on his path. He wasn't afraid of the darkness, but there was a strange feeling that bothered him. It was as if something was watching him, waiting in the darkness. As he followed a winding road that bordered the forest, Alex felt a chill run down his spine. A feeling that something wasn't right overcame him. He slowed down, looking nervously around. His eyes swept the dark forest, but there was nothing visible other than the trees. That's when he saw her. A pale, skeletal figure emerged from the shadows of the forest. Her hair hung in tangles around her face, and her clothes looked old-fashioned, as if straight out of a period story. The figure was standing on the side of the road, staring at Alex. A shiver ran down Alex's spine, and he stood still on the bike, his breath becoming visible in the cold night air. The pale figure extended a bony arm towards him, as if asking for help. But what terrified Alex most was the figure's face. There was no mouth, just empty, cavernous eyes that seemed to absorb the moonlight. The silence of the night was broken by the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant murmur of the stream. Alex was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. The figure continued to extend its arm towards him, as if trying to grab him. It was then that he woke up from his paralysis and, in an impulse of pure panic, turned the bike around and started pedaling as fast as he could. His muscles burned and his bike's headlight cut through the darkness as he fled the ominous figure. The owl's nocturnal cries became an ominous chorus as he disappeared into the darkness of the night. The encounter with the skeletal figure left him terrified, and he could not understand what he had seen. However, he knew he couldn't ignore the macabre encounter. He would have to discover the truth behind the frightening figure that now haunted him. The encounter with the pale, skeletal figure left Alex in a paralyzing state of shock. He knew he couldn't just ignore what he had seen. The figure had reached toward him, its cavernous eyes seeming to drain the moonlight. The frightening images continued to echo in his mind as he frantically pedaled back home. When he finally reached the safety of his room, he locked the door and windows. The night was full of the usual nocturnal sounds, the croaking of frogs and the calling of owls. But what really scared him were the memories of that figure, an encounter he couldn't explain. The following days were filled with a mix of terror and curiosity. Alex couldn't help but think of the pale figure he had found in the forest. He wondered if there could be a logical explanation for what he had seen. Maybe it was just a local resident trying to scare him, or a hallucination caused by the moonlight. The next night, when the full moon shone again, Alex decided it was time to face his fears and get back on the road. He was determined to discover the truth behind the skeletal figure. He got on his bike with his heart pounding. As he pedaled back to the winding road, the dark forest beside him seemed more impenetrable than ever. He knew he was approaching the place where he had made the macabre encounter, and his stomach was twisting with anxiety. Finally, he arrived at the place where the figure had emerged from the shadows. Alex turned off his bike's headlight and stood still, waiting, watching the darkness of the forest. Time passed slowly, but nothing happened. The night was silent, except for the natural sounds of the forest. Alex began to wonder if perhaps it had been an illusion the night before, a manifestation of his own fear. That's when he heard a sound, a kind of distant sigh. He turned in the direction of the sound and saw a figure emerging from the shadows once again. It was the same pale, skeletal figure he had encountered before. Her hair hung in tangles around her face, and her clothes looked like they belonged to another century. This time, the figure did not reach towards him. Instead, he began to follow him, slowly trailing behind his bike. The figure's empty eyes were fixed on Alex, as if he were their only hope. Alex pedaled as fast as he could, but the figure continued to chase him. The sound of footsteps dragging on the earth was incessant and terrifying. He felt like prey in a sinister hunt. The desperate cyclist continued to pedal down the road, but the figure was always there, emerging from the shadows. The figure's hair fluttered in the wind, and its empty eyes continued to stare at him. Alex began to doubt his own sanity. Could he be hallucinating? As the chase continued, Alex found himself thinking about how he could escape the mysterious figure. He could not understand why the figure pursued him, nor why it had appeared in his life. One thing was certain, he was determined to discover the truth. The chase lasted for miles, and Alex felt his strength running out. He couldn't escape the pale figure, who seemed to have supernatural resistance. The fear that dominated him was overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't give up. The answer to the pale figure's riddle was within his reach, and he was willing to find it, no matter what it took. The chase continued for miles on end, with Alex pedaling as fast as his legs would carry him, while the pale, skeletal figure dragged relentlessly behind him. The feeling of fear and despair that gripped him was overwhelming, but he was determined to discover the truth behind the mysterious figure. The winding road wound through the dark forest, and the darkness of the night was thick. The figure continued to follow him, its tangled hair fluttering in the wind. His empty eyes were fixed on Alex, as if he were the center of his universe. Alex could no longer contain the feeling that he was trapped in a nightmare. He wondered what the figure wanted with him. The question rattled around in his mind, but he couldn't find a logical answer. The minutes felt like hours, and the night forest closed in around him. The murmur of the nearby stream echoed like an ominous laugh. The chase showed no signs of abating, and Alex felt his strength dwindle. Finally, he arrived at an intersection on the road. He wasn't sure which way to go, but he knew he couldn't continue being chased. Taking a deep breath, he chose the road to the right and pedaled as fast as he could, moving away from the pale figure. The figure, however, did not follow him this time. When Alex looked back, he noticed that the figure was standing at the intersection, watching him with empty eyes. She couldn't or wouldn't cross the border of that road. Alex's breathing was labored, but he finally felt a flash of relief. He continued pedaling down the dark road, trying to catch his breath. The night remained silent, except for the natural sounds of the forest. Alex realized he was in unfamiliar territory, far from his hometown of Ravenbrook. The chase was over, but the enigma persisted. Why had the pale figure pursued him, and what did it want? Alex was determined to find answers. He cycled until he found a small clearing in the forest and decided to rest there for a moment. The moon was still shining in the sky, casting a silvery light over the forest. He sat down on the grass, panting, and tried to collect his thoughts. As he looked at the forest, something caught his attention. There was something strange hanging from a nearby tree. Alex walked closer and saw what looked like a piece of duct tape rolled up and hanging from a tree branch. On the tape, words were written awkwardly. "Help me." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The message on the duct tape was a cry for help, and he couldn't ignore it. Someone, or something, in those woods needed help, and he was willing to brave the unknown to find out what was going on. He ripped the tape off the tree and put it in his pocket. Taking a deep breath, he got back on his bike and pedaled towards the darkness of the forest. He didn't know what he would find there, but he was determined to discover the truth behind the mysterious message. As Alex entered the darkness of the forest, the feeling of being in unfamiliar territory overwhelmed him. The "help me" message on the tape hanging from the tree propelled him forward, but the anxiety was there. He was about to face the unknown, determined to discover the truth. The forest was enveloped in an almost unearthly silence. His bike's headlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the path ahead. The mysterious message guided him, and he pedaled deeper into the forest, past ancient trees and dense bushes. After some time, Alex arrived at a clearing where the beam of light from his bike illuminated something that made him stop abruptly. In the center of the clearing stood a decaying wooden hut covered in vines. The cabin looked abandoned for years, but a faint flickering light escaped through the cracks in the wood. With his heart beating fast, Alex approached the cabin. The door was ajar, and he hesitated for a moment. The message of help echoed in his mind, and he felt like he couldn't back down now. Cautiously, he pushed open the cabin door and entered. The interior was dark and dusty, with cobwebs adorning the ceiling beams. The faint light he had seen came from a candle burning in the center of the room. The cabin seemed empty, but there was something strange in the air. Alex began to explore the cabin's rooms. He found a small living room with furniture covered in dusty sheets and old photographs on the walls. It looked like someone had lived there, but the cabin had been abandoned for a long time. As he scanned the living room, he heard a sound coming from upstairs. It was like a distant murmur, an unintelligible whisper. With his heart in his throat, he climbed the stairs carefully. Upstairs, he found a room where the faint candlelight shone brightly. In the center of the room, a pale, skeletal figure stood. It was the same figure that had chased him on the road, the figure without a mouth, with empty eyes. The figure had its back to Alex, staring at a wall where a series of old photographs hung. Alex noticed that the photographs were of families, children, and adults, all smiling and happy. However, the photos were scratched and damaged, as if someone had tried to erase people's happy faces. Alex took a cautious step towards the figure and finally found the courage to speak. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't respond, but slowly turned to face him. His empty eyes seemed to penetrate Alex's soul. That's when he noticed something strange. The figure was holding a strip of duct tape similar to the one he had found on the tree. The figure held out the tape toward him, and Alex took it. On the tape, words were written awkwardly. "Don't let me forget." Alex looked at the pale figure and understood that she was trying to convey a message that had been lost to time. The figure seemed to be trapped in a cycle, condemned to wander the forest and ask for help, but no one would listen. He realized that the figure was not a threat, but rather a tormented soul-seeking redemption. The message, "Don't let me forget," was a plea for someone to remember her, for her story to be told. Alex left the cabin, duct tape in hand, determined to share the skeletal figure's story. He didn't know who she was or why she was trapped in the forest, but he knew he couldn't let her story be forgotten. As he cycled back to town, the pale figure disappeared into the darkness of the forest, finally at peace. The night was silent, and the forest hid its secrets. Alex was determined to fulfill the promise he had made to the figure and tell his story so that it would never be forgotten.